Hello, everyone. Uh, you know, uh, welcome to the Bangkok bareback. I am, of course, the dermatillomaniac, and you are the intermerium. Together we are the dermatillomaniac and intermerium. Whatever. The Bangkok bareback, my cultural literacy series. I am back again. Today we're going to be talking about something very, very interesting, or I don't know, it's interesting to me, not to you guys, but obviously this is a cultural literacy, series, and we're going to be talking about something very interesting. It's a song. Very few people, maybe not in the United States, know it, but a lot of people in England know it, called the Golden Glove. And it references the old culture of the United Kingdom, or England at the time. It was written naturally in the American colonies, but it spread over to England. So even though it's the culture of the American colonies, it's referencing the English Civil War a lot more in the song. And it references the freedoms that the English people used to have before 1999 or 1995, sorry, when they got rid of guns in the United Kingdom. And so in the song, you hear the lady lost her golden glove. She go out hunting with a dog and her gun. And it's so interesting because you can't do that anymore in England. And there's a reason. There was a cultural thing that happened. There was a shooting, sadly, that happened that got rid of all the guns pretty much in the United Kingdom. All the ones that were not registered or not regulated enough for the government's liking. They got rid of supposed gun rights or supposed self-protection. So now people can't even really protect each other with knives. They even regulate knives now. But what's interesting about it is, what is so interesting about it is the Golden Glove is a cultural song about what was England in the past. And it's so interesting to me that the American colonies made it. The cultural, basically the American colonies is the 1660s of the English culture. During the English Civil War, gun rights were established. Freedom of speech was established. The monarchy was the weakest it was ever. The government was the weakest it was ever at that time. During the Civil War and after the Civil War, after the Glorious Revolution, a lot of the stuff that it became more liberalized. They liberated themselves from the government's power. Now what you're starting to see, ever since the 1990s, that culture has gone away, sadly, at least in England. And it's spreading to the United States, too. I've seen it. It's more and more gun laws are getting passed each year. More and more business regulations being passed every year, where our economy is going to slow down, just like the United Kingdom. Our military is, our military development is going to be a little bit slower, but that's besides the point, right? Despite that, right? Everything that I just said about all that, even though the English culture of rights is dying, the ideal of natural rights is dying, there are people who clearly don't like them anymore. You see, my brothers are a perfect example. They benefit from natural law. They benefit from ownership. But they psychologically disagree with it. They believe that ownership is hierarchy. And so they believe everything should be socialized in a union. Which, okay, nothing... It doesn't sound like the worst system in the world, but I mean, it's still going to be hierarchical. You're still going to elect a very corrupt union leader. There's very, very few unions in the world that are not as... Most unions in the world, in terms of international politics, there are very few unions that are not corrupt. Most unions are very, very corrupt, very, very inept. You see examples of it all over the world, right? Unions are just as corrupt as any other institution. That's the problem with these unionists or these socialists, whatever we want to call them. Some of them are non-unionists, some of them are socialists, whatever. But my brothers are not really, they're not like blue-collar workers like me. They're not. They're more intellectual. I'm on the intellectual side of socialists. So it's clearly you're going to have to get a intellectual class to control the socialist class, or to control the labor class. But it's I don't know a whole lot about socialism, right? Or at least if at least I know a little more about Marxist, because Marxism is like the main socialist. But I do think of it as like a scam. How can you make a state to get rid of profit, but then the state needs to make profit in order to get rid of all the other profit? Therefore, all you've done is just centralized all the profit into one group. I would rather have a bunch of hierarchies fighting over my dollar, instead of one hierarchy getting my dollar. You know what I mean? Now, granted, our government is a central hierarchy that does get every piece of every dollar that you make. It makes about 20% of every dollar, any piece of revenue, whether it's legal or illegal. They will find a way to tax it. They will, most of the time. And it's becoming easier and easier to tax everything. Pretty much. Cash is like the one exception, but for the most part, right? The idea of ownership is dying. And so when the English Civil War happened, this is interesting, because this whole thing's about the Golden Glove, right? The Golden Glove in the song talks about her, she owns her property or whatever, but her father, this is interesting because the song is basically against tradition. And I find it so fascinating, right? So the father wants to meet with the squire, right? The squire that she doesn't really like. And she says to the other boy, she's like, I give you this glove. Whoever finds my glove will be my next husband. And the father makes the deal. Okay, daughter. This is in the song The Golden Glove, by the way. I do recommend it. It was written in 1770 in the American colonies during the American Revolution, or right before the American Revolution, sorry, because the American Revolution happened in 1775. But anyway, it's a song for natural rights and against tradition. And I think that we've lost that now. We are for tradition more than we are for natural rights, although we've been kind of against tradition for a while now too, with the social justice movement, which I'm not 100% against social justice. I just think that what they're going to do, a lot of these social justice people are going to create hierarchies that are unsavory. That's what's going to happen. They're going to claim to be virtuous when in actuality are just as flawed as the right-wingers. And the right-wingers are at least a little bit more honest, which is why I'd rather have them. They might not be... They're still grifters. I mean, you look at Donald Trump, he's a total grifter. You look at Elon Musk, he's a total grifter. They make their billions off of just selling to people. Selling people their stock or whatever they do. They're more about, they know that the market's being pumped up. They can just decide to sell stock to these people, or Bitcoin, or whatever they sell them to. So a lot of right-wingers are grifters, so I don't like, but at least the right-wingers have this attitude like, I will do it. I will personally improve myself. Meanwhile, the left-wingers are like, well, let's improve other people's lives. And by doing that, they say that, they just take the commission away. The right-wingers are like, well, it's clear that this is a hierarchy. You have to work for yourself in order to make the money you want. And I think that's a more honest approach to the world. I do think right-wingers are more honest. Well, I don't consider myself a right-winger or a left-winger. I just look at the way humans act. I do think that the social justice will destroy, well, tradition's already pretty much been destroyed. I mean, we were a monarchy under the American colonies, which is, it's weird that song was written in the American colonies, got popular in England, not really played in the United States anymore, but a lot of English people still play it because it reminds them of the old times during the natural rights phrase of the 1660s. And then, because the song is about the 1660s mainly, you could tell based on the way it's written. And then, what is it, like, social justice has destroyed tradition, and it's also destroyed natural rights. You see them saying, oh, you don't need to own that land. The land should be owned by everyone. All the homeless people should be able to own it. And so you're starting to see, like, and then what's happening is, well, the streets are being littered by homeless people. They say, well, it's kind of rude to move them, so they're allowed to live here. And it's like, yeah, but they're dangerous to society. There's needles on the ground. Don't you think it would be better for the kids not to play with the needles? But the social justice don't see that. They see that the people and the homeless are suffering, and they would rather just leave them alone rather than having kids be safe. But it's such an interesting philosophy. And I find that social justice is a self-destructive philosophy, especially with the transgender movement. It's fascinating that, they get kids to they may not realize it when they're young. Obviously, they're kids. But a lot of the parents are like, well, let's do hormone treatment. What do you think this is going to do to the birth rate? Now, granted, I think only like less than 5% are trans. So it's not going to impact the birth rate that much. But that could still be devastating if you have an entire generation, sterilizing themselves, or even the dating market's already terrible, and you have these people, and it's like, oh, and I go and I swipe on the dating apps, right? It's really funny, and it's just all, oh, I'm trans, I'm this, I'm that. I'm like, I don't care, I really don't. But I guess it's like, oh, they're psychologically different from me, so I just don't want to date that. So it's such an interesting concept. And so when I go back in history and I look at English natural rights, and I see that the rights in England have been eroded, and then the rights in the United States have been eroded slower, but they've kept to the tradition right after the English Civil War in the United States, except for the fact that we didn't reestablish the monarchy after the American Revolution. That was the only thing we sort of scrapped in the American Revolution. We basically still ruled ourselves. It's so fascinating to me just reading about it and understanding the song, the cultural relevance of the song, The Golden Glove. You guys really, or you people really need to listen to The Golden Glove. It's incredible. It's an incredible song. That the instrumental just sounds good, but then the words on top of it, you're like, wow, this sounds like a very free society. Or at least a very liberating society once the woman gets the man she wants, right? Which is kind of fascinating. Like, they're singing about the woman's not singing, it's the man singing about a woman that gets the man that she wants. But it's kind of fascinating. But like, that's the thing, this song is a really historical song, especially for me who lived in the post colonial America right after, 200 years after the American colonies. Just hearing the song it brings back just what we were supposed to be, kind of, or what natural rights were. It's such a fascinating, even though it doesn't reference it blatantly, you could tell based on this. It just feels English. It just feels like the English natural rights that people always reference, the guns and the land ownership and mortgages and all that stuff, like common ownership, or like individual ownership of things. You see that you hear that in the song, and you kind of feel it a little bit. You hear that English culture in that song. And while people might not like it, they don't like, what's the guy's name? John Locke. Yeah, John Locke, the guy who basically wrote right after the English Civil War about what we should do. That the king has the will of God, and if the king loses the will of God and the will of the people, then the king shall be deposed, and they'll have a new king or a new democracy, or new republic, I should say. Because I'm not a big fan of the word democracy. I'd rather use republic. But, John Locke was not opposed to republicanism. He wasn't. But he said, if you're going to do republicanism, it should be at a slower rate. And I do agree. And then he also said, public education it shouldn't be funded by the government. It should be funded by churches. And then the churches shall teach trades and reading and writing. And then you make a small profit for the church. The church gets a small profit after you're done your schooling. Which I find fascinating that it was a very religious thing that he referenced John Locke. John Locke is a very interesting philosopher. I love a lot of John Locke's stuff. But a lot of people like, Eken Burke or whatever? Burke, the other philosopher, Irish philosopher. But I'm a bigger fan of John Locke, personally. But that's probably because I'm American. And most Americans like John Locke over Eken Burke. But anyway, it's just fascinating to see that culture in the song. And I think that everyone should listen to The Golden Glove and understand how English culture changed after the 1990s and why it's happening here as well. And if you understand why it's happening, maybe we could prevent the change from happening a little bit slower. It will happen eventually. There's not really a way to fix it. But what I recommend is buy index funds and just hold, like I said about the soft investing, do as much soft investing as you can until society collapses, and you have to use your hard investments. But like I said, everything ties it back to doing support, I'm trying to tie all these episodes together. This cultural literacy series is such a mess. But anyway, this is the Bangkok Bareback. Welcome, goodbye to the Bangkok Bareback. Yeah, I don't know what to say. Farewell to the Bangkok Bareback. Episode 3, I guess. Goodbye.